acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where I have the privilege of working, researching and learning. And I also invite those of you who are still here to acknowledge the First Nations owners of the lands where you are currently watching this conference from. So I've got this funny little slide to start with, and I was quite impressed that Francis had a similar slide at the beginning where he positioned himself. And so I'm going to do that little positionality as well. In life, like many people, I have many hats. I'm a non-Indigenous language and learning educator in the GRED team, as Zoe just mentioned. That means that I support high degree research students, or we call them HDR students. But another hat that I wear is that of a PhD student. And so my research is on HDR supervision, which basically means I have the amazing opportunity to be working in the space that I'm also researching. So I conduct workshops for QUT's HDR supervisors on many topics: supervising thesis by publication, academic writing, feedback techniques, tough conversations, and one workshop in particular, cross-cultural supervision. So as part of my cross-cultural supervision workshop, I introduced the topic of supervising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research students. But I came to realise that this was actually a very important topic and a big topic, and it required its own workshop. So today I'm going to talk to you about the creation of a foundational professional development workshop at QUT, which is supervising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. So I'll just quickly talk to you about that. This is how I'm going to present my, my presentation today. I'll be looking at Advanced HE, what is it? And I'll be talking to you about the Associate Fellowship in Indigenous Knowledges, what basically that means, why it matters, what was the workshop and what did we do? And then I'll be ending with lots of resources for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander HDR students as well as their supervisors. And I know you will be getting the slides, and there will be lots of clickable links in that for you. So what is Advanced HE? Perhaps you've heard of it, perhaps you haven't. So Advanced HE, or higher education, ensures that teaching and supervision practices are grounded in evidence, reflective practice and inclusive pedagogies. So they're critical foundations for culturally safe HDR supervision. QUT is a member, and Advanced HE is a global organisation, and it's focused on improving teaching, learning, leadership and equity in higher education. Many of you will know it, or maybe you will know it through the UK Professional Standards Framework, and this framework sets benchmarks for excellent and inclusive educational practice. It's also responsible for the fellowship scheme, which recognises and develops educators across the world, including those who work in supervision. So Advanced HE has many forms of fellowship. I've just listed them here for you. So there's AFHE, which is the Associate Fellow, the Senior Fellow, and the Principal Fellow. So what does that involve? So fellowship recognises, as I mentioned, evidence-based teaching, a commitment to inclusive and reflective pedagogy, leadership in learning, teaching and educational development, and professional values that are aligned with that professional standards framework. So back in 2021, QUT offered staff the opportunity to learn more about the Indigenous knowledges as part of Advanced HE and the Higher Education Academy. For me, gaining the Associate Fellow in Indigenous knowledge was a turning point. It made visible the gap in practical support for QUT supervisors of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander HDR candidates. And this going through this fellowship really inspired me to develop a workshop that helps supervisors embed culturally safe, critically reflective and genuinely supportive supervision practices. So what is it? What's the AFHEA? So the Indigenous Knowledges Pathway for Associate Fellowship is really significant. It recognises educators and supervisors who work respectfully with Indigenous knowledge and who are committed to culturally safe practice. Completing this pathway is what helped me see how underserved supervisors are in this space. And I think it's been mentioned many times throughout the conference today. So ultimately, it was completing this AFHEA Indigenous Knowledges which inspired me to create the workshop. I also want to show you, I took a screenshot of an email, and you can see I actually use this in my signature as well. So I am a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, but I'm also an associate fellow, Indigenous Knowledges. So why is it important? Let's go through all the reasons why it's important. So Indigenous HDR candidates, as we've heard many times over today, continue to face systemic barriers in supervision, institutional culture, and research practices. Supervisors often want to support Indigenous candidates well, but they lack that structured guidance, training, and confidence in culturally safe supervision. Culturally safe supervision directly impacts HDR retention, wellbeing, and success, particularly for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers. Empowering supervisors strengthens Indigenous research leadership, ensuring that First Nations knowledge systems, their methodologies and priorities are valued and sustained within the Academy. The sector is calling for greater cultural capability, but existing professional development rarely translate policy into practical action for supervisors. But the AFHEA Indigenous Knowledges pathway recognises and elevates Indigenous pedagogical principles, offering a model for respectful, relational, and strength-based supervision practice. Building supervisor capability is a structural intervention that benefits individual candidates, but it also hopefully can shift broader institutional culture. And finally, strengthening Indigenous voices in HDR supervision contributes to reconciliation, equity, and justice in research and also knowledge production. So my previous slide talked about how the sector is calling for greater cultural capability. I want to share with you something I found in the 2016 review of Australia's research training with the Australian Council of Learned Academies, or they go by ACOLA. So ACOLA's role in Australia is to review Australia's HDR training system, and they consider the priorities for reform. So in 2016, they noted that one of the priorities includes supporting Indigenous Australian research candidates, as you can see here. So let's look at the workshop. What was it and what did I do? I had the great privilege of including on my panel Frances, who was our inspiring keynote speaker today. I also had Dr. Juliana McLaughlin. So Julie, I'm not sure if she's here. Julie was here earlier. Julie is a QUT academic with the School of Communication. Celise, who was on our panel earlier this afternoon, she was also on my panel for this workshop. As we know, she's an Indigenous woman and she's also a PhD student in creative practice. Julie is actually Celise's principal supervisor. So that was a really great dynamic to have in the workshop as well. And I also had Professor Hank Hauser. He's a strategic lead educated development with the Qualt Academy. And he's had a lot of experience supervising students from many cultures, actually, and particularly from the Torres Strait. So what kind of questions did I ask of the panel? I thought I'd share them with you so that you can see what we talked about. This was an unrecorded, in-person workshop. It was my favourite workshop of 2024. And so these were some of the questions that I posed to the panel. So one of them was talking about recognising the importance of First Nations knowledge systems without appropriating or misrepresenting them. I also looked at culturally appropriate ways to supervise. I won't go through all of these questions just out of interest of time. In Francis's keynote address this morning, he talked a lot about the concept of reciprocity, and this concept was also reflected in my workshop. I asked the panel to also talk about power imbalance, and you can see it's located here in the NHMRC's report, where they talk about reciprocity should enable agreements where all groups or people have equal rights and power in relationships. Although in the context of research, this often involves unequal power relationships. Reciprocity recognises all partners' contributions and ensures the benefits from research outcomes are equitable and valued for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities. I also brought in Celeste to look at student perspectives. I leaned on her experience, and I asked her to reflect on questions that are here for you to read. And then finally, we looked at methodologies. When we talk about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research methodologies, we're talking about ways of researching that are grounded in country, in community, in kinship, relational accountability, and storytelling. They aren't just methods that we add on. They are complete knowledge systems that shape how questions are asked, how data is interpreted, and how researchers position themselves in relation to community. It's such an important part, or it was such an important part of the workshop. And I just draw on what Celeste mentioned earlier. She said, she's not only a student, she's also leading her non-Indigenous supervisors on how on methodologies as well. So there's a real dual role for her and other Indigenous HDR students. Okay, so I also wanted to share some of the resources that we have at QUT. We have a dedicated team here to support HDR Indigenous students. It's the Karumba Institute. I understand that not all universities have a dedicated Indigenous student support unit. And so I know we're very lucky, and I thought I would just showcase them a little bit. So again, there will be clickable links when you get these slides. As it reads on their website, the Karumba Institute provides a world-class Indigenous research educational environment that foregrounds Indigenous sovereignty. So they foreground these areas of importance: pride, power, justice, joy, belonging, and possibility. They also offer support to Indigenous Australian HDR students in the following areas. You can see here lots of advice, 24/7 computer access, cultural support. So, they really are an amazing support to the HDR community, student community we have here. Also at QUT, we provide useful tips on how we use language to promote respectful conversation. They discuss why language matters and provide historical context, and documents such as this are continuously updated and guidelines are refreshed. So I also wanted to share with you these guidelines, which talk about the recommended use of words for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. We also have the connection strategy. This strategy makes a commitment to embracing ethnic and cultural diversity, and within the strategy connects aspiration to opportunity for our students and staff, and expands pathways for our Indigenous Australian students, and it builds supportive research environments. And so I wanted to share that with you today. Something else that we have at QUT is modules on supervision, so they can take the Indigenous perspectives in learning and teaching model to help inform their practice. And also this page emphasises the importance of diverse perspectives and inclusion in the learner experiencing, but specifically acknowledging that to engage with diversity means being open to different ideas, needs, values, and viewpoints of people from different backgrounds, groups, and communities, and specifically Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges. So I also just quickly, I have a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to also share, as I was creating this workshop, I came across a lot of additional external resources which I didn't know were available. and I'm sharing with those people who may be interested in sharing with your universities or people who would like to do a similar workshop. So this is the University's Australia Indigenous Strategy 2022 to 2025. It lays out a sector-wide agenda for how Australian universities support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in and through higher education. There's also the supervision guide supporting the Australian Code for the responsible conduct of research. It outlines the responsibilities of supervisors and institutions to ensure that all HDR candidates are supported in a way that is safe, transparent, and aligned within those national standards. For anyone working with Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander HDR students, these principles are especially important because, like I've been saying all along, they reinforce the need for culturally respectful, accountable, and high-quality supervision that protects both the student and the integrity of the research. I might skip this one. Oh, no, maybe I won't. So this is a slide talking about the Uluru Statement from the Heart. If you're unfamiliar with that, this statement asks us, everyone in Australia, to walk together in a movement, the Australian people for a better future. For those of us in universities and people in HDR supervision, it's a reminder that truth-telling, respect for Indigenous knowledges, and genuine partnership must shape the way we support Indigenous researchers. This particular resource was something that I found the day before of the workshop, actually. I'll just quickly tell you about the Lowitja Institute. It's Australia's National Institute for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Research. It's Indigenous governed organisation that leads, funds and supports research grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing. The Institute is known for producing high quality, community driven research and practical resources that strengthen outcomes for Indigenous peoples. I was so excited when I came across this resource because it actually is supporting Indigenous research, a practical guide for supervisors. It's a particularly rich resource and I invite all of you to look at it. So there's a couple more links here to the Australian Council of Graduate Research and also the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Again, lots of clickable links, but I will end here by saying my hope for presenting today is we want supervision to be a powerful site of cultural safety, respect and partnership. I think if we keep learning and walking alongside our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander high degree research students, we can help create a research culture where every researcher is able to thrive. So thank you very much.
Another great presentation. Thank you, Natasha. That was really helpful.